and I'm the team leader for National Skill Strategy projects at the OECD, and I'm very happy to be here today, and very happy to be here in Maribor for the first time. I've been in Slovenia many times, but Maribor for the first time, so I'm very, very excited to be here. I wish I just had more time. I'm also cognizant of that I'm between you and your lunch, so I hope I can keep this somewhat interesting and entertaining, so you stay awake until that time and don't leave me here on the podium. So I'm going to be providing more of an international perspective. I was very impressed by the panel here, very deep knowledge of what is happening here in Slovenia. I'm not going to give you that deep knowledge of what's happening here in Slovenia. Well, I'm going to be giving you more information about what is happening from an international perspective that you can reflect on in the context of Slovenia. Later in the day, my colleague Ben and Emma will be speaking to you about our project in Slovenia, and they'll be able to say something much more concrete about Slovenia. But I will, throughout my presentation, focus on the data points for Slovenia and make some comments about that. The context of this conference is adult learning. Our perspective is much broader. We look at it very holistically, so I will cover more bases than adult learning, but I'll try to spend as much as time reflecting on the implications for adult learning. And I'll also be focusing on the megatrends, which we'll talk about in a moment, and their potential implications as well. And what I'm presenting you today are lessons learned from OECD Skill Strategy projects. We're updating the OECD Skill Strategy. It will be launched in spring of 2019. So you're to some extent getting a sneak preview of that. And I hope when that's released that you will take a look at that. That would make me happy. So anyway, I'll go on with my presentation now. And I think the first thing I need to talk about is what we mean by skills. Because we don't all share the same concept of what skills mean. And that differs a lot across countries too. In my own country, Canada, when people talk about skills, they're often thinking of vocational skills. They're thinking about things that people do in jobs, for jobs, right? So like pipe fitter, welder, auto mechanic, etc. When the OECD refers to skills, we're talking about skills in a much broader sense, referring to knowledge, competencies, abilities, and values even. So more specifically, we're interested in cognitive and metacognitive skills such as literacy, numeracy, and problem solving, social-emotional skills such as self-control, self-organization, perseverance, and sociability, as well as those technical, professional, and sector-specific skills, the skills for specific jobs. Now, we don't have indicators of all of these skills, but that should not constrain our vision. Right? We know that these skills matter for success in the economy and society. So we start with that broader perspective, and of course we reflect on what we can say about the skills performance across countries. I mean, we knew skills mattered before we actually had any indicators about skills, right? We used proxies like education level and field of study, but it was skills that we were really interested in. So we've evolved. We now have direct indicators of skills, but not of all the types of skills that matter to us. So, what is the OECD Skill Strategy? Many of you probably don't know what the OECD Skill Strategy is. So the OECD Skill Strategy provides countries with a strategic and comprehensive approach for assessing their skills, challenges, and opportunities, and also for identifying and developing concrete policy recommendations for improving their skills performance. This strategy is composed of 3 interrelated components: developing relevant skills across the life course, using skills effectively in work and life, and strengthening the governance of skill systems. And this is important. What this framework recognizes is that at first what you need to do is make sure that people are developing the skills that they're going to need for their economies and society. Skills that will address skill shortages, skills that will drive innovation and productivity, skills that will help you achieve your social goals. But that's just part of the equation. That's not enough by itself. You also need to make sure that once you've developed those skills, they're actually being used effectively in the labor market and society. So that means, for example, ensuring that people, when they leave school, find jobs where they can use their skills, or have opportunities to use those skills in society through volunteerism or active political engagement or other forms. And in those contexts, too, we need to ensure that they're using their skills intensively. You can use them more or less intensively. And we know the more intensively people use their skills in workplaces, for example, the greater is the productivity gains, the greater are the wages, etc. But doing all this better also requires a strong skills system, characterized by promoting collaboration across government, not just across ministries, but levels of government. We've heard a little bit about that, I think, in the last presentation. Also engaging stakeholders across the policy cycle, because we're increasingly, especially when we're talking about lifelong learning, we're talking about areas where government has more limited tools and leverage. And so it's really absolutely critical that governments work more with stakeholders, and stakeholders work more together. All of this needs to be underpinned by a strong information system, so that people can make informed choices, individuals, firms, governments, educators, employers, and we also need to align and coordinate financing to make sure the financing goes to where it's most in need, and so that we can use our funds efficiently and effectively, because of course we have limited resources. So before, and this strategy has been tested in 13 countries so far in the last 5 years, so starting with Norway, Korea and Austria, then Portugal and Spain, Mexico and Peru, Netherlands, Italy and Slovenia. And we've started projects with Poland and Latvia this year, and Flanders this year, and we're also starting with several more countries in the new year. And so the framework has proved to be quite robust across all these various contexts. Some of these countries we worked with on more than one project, including in Slovenia, where we did a diagnostic-based project, where we assessed what the major skills challenges and opportunities are, and then we followed that with an action-based project that Ben and Emma will talk to you about in a short while, where we drilled down on a particular topic, which was the governance of adult learning. Okay, so you'll hear more about that later. Before I talk to you about what we've learned about from the countries we work with in terms of developing and using skills and governance, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the trends that are mega trends that are shaping skills priorities in countries. What we're seeing across the countries that we work with is that countries are increasingly reconsidering what skills matter most for their economic and achieving their economic and social ambitions. And also they're rethinking what is the role and responsibility of governments with respect to developing and using skills, and indeed what is the roles and responsibilities of stakeholders, and have they changed? So these trends include globalization, which is characterized by the expansion of global value chains, the offshoring and outsourcing of certain kinds of work, which is making some workers in some countries more vulnerable. Often individuals working in more routine jobs, low-skilled jobs, often in the manufacturing sector, being offshored to countries with lower wages. Oops, where did we do that? Technological change, which is characterized by rapid development of new technologies, which is transforming the worlds of work and reshaping the skills that are needed in workplaces. But it's also at the same time providing us with new opportunities to learn in new ways, in ways that are actually quite beneficial probably for the adult population. We have demographic change. We heard a lot about that in the last session. Large expected decline in working age population and aging population. So how do we use skills to increase our productivity so we can afford to pay for those pensions and other social benefits for an aging population on a smaller working age population base? And some argue too that you've got less margin for error with a smaller cohort of people coming in versus those exiting. You need to make sure that you're developing the skills that indeed matter for the economy in that context. Excuse me. And we have growing numbers of migrants. And these are a challenge for some of our societies, but they're also a great opportunity. Their skills can be used to address shortages in their country. They can, they've been found to possess strong entrepreneurship skills, etc. So immigrants are also a way we can harness our societies for the better as well. So these megatrends are contributing to the well-documented pattern of job polarization, which you're probably all very familiar with. Looking at the period from 1995 to 2015, we see the shares of jobs that require high-skilled workers has increased quite significantly across countries, while the share of jobs requiring low-skilled workers has risen quite rather marginal in most countries. Whereas the shares of jobs requiring middle-skilled jobs workers, rather, workers with middle skills has declined quite precipitously, quite quickly, quite steeply. In Slovenia, we see that there has been decreases in the shares of jobs both in middle skilled and low skilled, so it's a bit of an outlier. All net jobs have been in high skilled occupations. Okay, so it's even greater pressures here in Slovenia than we see in many other countries. These trends matter, of course. We've had relatively robust economies in OECD countries over the last 5 years. As we've recovered from the recessions, people remain employed more or less, low unemployment rates. But when we go to the next downturn, the next recession, what is going to happen? Are these people in the middle-skilled occupations that are losing their jobs, are they going to be bumping out the people in the low-skilled occupations from their jobs, and what are they going to do? Right? So the importance of upskilling and reskilling throughout life becomes increasingly important in this context. And the pressures don't end there. Automation is transforming the workplace. The OECD estimates that 14% of jobs across the OECD on average, and 26% in Slovenia, are at high risk of automation, which is to say that they have a high risk of those jobs disappearing due to the task being automated. Okay? This is a conservative estimate relative to many of the estimates out there provided by other analysts, but still it's quite significant. Another 32% are estimated to be at significant risk of automation, and it was on average and 27% in Slovenia. And this means that these jobs are not likely to be automated, but the tasks that are performed on these jobs are likely to change quite significantly. So what this means is that you have large numbers of workers who are going to need to develop new skills to perform new tasks in new jobs, and even large numbers of workers who need to upskill and reskill to perform new tasks in their existing jobs. And how well our skill systems facilitate this adjustment will determine to a great extent how well individuals, firms, and our societies will be able to confront the challenges and seize the opportunities of the future. This digitalization will raise the need for training. This figure shows that individuals working in a highly digital environment are more likely to require training than those in a less digital intensive environment, and this is true across individuals at various levels of education. So given the trends that I've just spoken about, and as technology continues to permeate into all facets of work and life, we're going to see that people are going to need to upskill and reskill in ways that they perhaps have not in the past. So all of this has important implications for how governments see and society see their roles with respect to talent development and talent management. At the risk of oversimplifying, one could say we're moving from a paradigm in which governments have traditionally focused on developing skills, front-end loading the development of skills in primary and secondary education and tertiary education, and then focusing on the activation of skills in adulthood. In other words, making sure that people find jobs, maintain jobs, and if they lose jobs, find new jobs, to a new paradigm in which they're focused on developing skills across the entire life course, not just in primary and secondary education, tertiary education. Countries are increasingly interested in early learning. How do we make sure people get a good start in life so they do well in primary and secondary education, and thereby also do well in tertiary education, and thereby also are lifelong learners? But they're also interested, for the reasons that I've just mentioned, in continuing to ensure that people have opportunities to develop their skills in adulthood, more so than in the past, for the reasons we've mentioned. People are going to find themselves transitioning between jobs more frequently than they did in the past. Many people will find themselves in non-standard types of work, the sort of gig economy workers with perhaps more precarious relationship with their employers, and thereby they may be less able to access employer-sponsored training. Also, in the context of technological changes, I've mentioned we'll need to upskill and reskill. And people are going to be delaying their retirement in many countries due to population aging, and therefore they're going to need to upskill and reskill to make sure that their skills are current so that they can continue to function in the labor market. But countries are also increasingly interested in getting in the workplace, influencing what happens in firms, to ensure that firms are using the skills of workers fully and effectively, as I've mentioned before. So let's turn back now to our framework, developing relevant skills across the life course, and what are some of the key findings that we've found. So, OECD countries have sizable shares of workers with low levels of basic skills, as measured by the Survey of Adult Skills, or PIAC, in literacy, numeracy, or both types of skills. And you can see it ranges from about 10% in Japan to well over 60% in Chile. These are individuals which will have difficulty understanding more than basic text or performing more than basic mathematical operations. These people will be challenged to be successful in that new economy, in the digital world. And many of these people will be in the workforce for many years to come, decades to come. So that's a challenge for our societies. So what do we do? Well, success in the early years is absolutely critical. And there's lots of research on this. This just shows a simple correlation that the countries that have done a good job of developing the skills of their youth also typically have highly skilled adult populations. Perhaps not surprising. You want to be a country in that top right quadrant. Slovenia is in the bottom right quadrant, so it's actually doing quite a good job now of developing the skills of its youth, but still has a relatively low skilled adult population. To some extent, that will work itself out over generations as these younger, more skilled individuals move into the labor market and replace the lower skilled individuals who leave the labor market. But nonetheless, you have a very sizable share of low skilled adults that you need to continue to work with. And for the reasons I've mentioned before, even people who do well in learning early in life will continue to need to learn throughout their lives. So success in early learning is critical. And we also need to recognize that children do not all benefit from the same opportunities to learn. Here we look at percentage of students who first use a computer when they're 6 years or younger, and we look at it across different socioeconomic status groups, and we see that those from lower socioeconomic status backgrounds are less likely to have had access to computers. So these people will be at a natural disadvantage in developing those skills that are important for our economies and society. And our education system can be an important way of ensuring that people do indeed develop those skills. We find that there is no trade-off between excellence and equity. We find that countries that are top performers in terms of skill development, both in youth and adult, are also those countries that are typically characterized by having strong equity in skills. So less variation in skills across different groups. Access to early childhood education makes a difference, especially for disadvantaged groups. Here we see the score point difference in science performance between 15-year-olds, students who attended early childhood education for more than 2 years, and those who did for less than 2 years. And here you see that there's a significant bump or an increase in scores for those who stayed in early childhood education longer, and this is robust even when controlling for socioeconomic background. So this can be a means of raising the skills of the entire population, and at the same time, it's an opportunity to compensate for differences in opportunities for people in different backgrounds. So early childhood education makes a difference. It's not all about the money. We often talk about money when we talk about education and skills. We need more money because money matters to a point. But what we found is money matters to about $50,000 US per person between the ages of 6 and 15. Beyond that point, additional expenditures have very little impact on actual outcomes. Okay, so there's a threshold at which you're spending more money, but you're getting less and less gain from that. So it's not just about how much money you're spending, but it's how you're spending that money that's critical as well. And it's not only about how much time we spend, but also about how we use that time. Here we see time spent in learning at school and outside of school across different countries. And the bars in the dotted line, and that's depicted in the axis on the right-hand side, the score, which shows productivity or the score points in science per hour of total learning time. And what you see is the countries on the left, which are the most productive in terms of raising the skills per hour, are the ones that spend the least time in learning, and those on the right, with the lowest productivity, had the worst, had spent more time in learning. So it can be somewhat, this can be counteracted, spending more and more time in education or in training. We need to think about it, not just about how much time, but how we use that time. Tertiary education can help build strong skills, but it's no guarantee for building strong skills. Here we see across countries, those with higher levels of education, tertiary education, do indeed have stronger skills than those with lower levels of education. So tertiary education matters greatly. But we also find that there's great variation in the skills of graduates at different levels of education looked across different countries. So for example, we see that upper secondary graduates in Japan, Netherlands, and Finland to some extent leave school with skills that are similar or greater than countries such as Slovenia, tertiary graduates in countries such as Slovenia, Spain, Italy, Greece, Turkey, and Chile. So it's not just about pushing access to tertiary education, right? You also need to ensure that people develop the strong skills in compulsory education so that tertiary education can further build on those skills, right? So it's absolutely important to get the skills developed early in life. That's not an argument against tertiary education. Tertiary education is absolutely essential, but it's just a point about ensuring the quality in the early years as well, so that countries can gain most from those investments in tertiary education. Across the countries we work with, there's great concerns about the fact that many graduates do not leave school with the skills that are most needed in the labor market. You see here qualification mismatch. So that refers to overqualification, so a situation in which people have qualifications in excess of those that are typically required for their jobs, and underqualification, whereby individuals have skills that are qualifications that are not commensurate with those typically required for the job. And we see it's quite significant across countries, up to about 40%. The population is qualification mismatch. But interestingly, when you look at skills mismatches, the second chart, you see this in much less. So why is that? Well, one of the things it suggests, there's many possible explanations, but one of the things it suggests is that many people who are seemingly mismatched on the basis of qualification are actually well matched on the basis of their skills. So they don't actually have skills that we would normally associate with their given qualification, which suggests issues of quality for some people, but in the context of underqualification, it also suggests that, guess what? People don't stop learning with education, formal education. So some people continue to develop their skills throughout their life, of course. We see field of study mismatch. So large shares of people are not in jobs that are related to their field of study. Does this matter? The evidence is not conclusive in this. In fact, the OECD finds that a field of study mismatch only incurs a wage penalty when it's associated also with a level of study mismatch. So it's not clear that field of study mismatch is an issue of great concern. Nonetheless, across the countries that we work with, we do hear them articulate concerns about skill shortages, that there are bottleneck occupations, there are employers who are trying to employ people with specific skills that they cannot fill. They cannot find people with those skills, and that is something that countries do need to be concerned about. You often hear about this in the context of the so-called STEM occupations: science, technology, engineering, and math. So more needs to be done to find ways to ensure that people come out of education not only with high-quality skills, but skills that are relevant for the needs of the economy and society. This one's interesting, perhaps not surprising. A large share of adults sees no need to continue in learning. 47% in Slovenia did not participate, did not want to participate in learning. Another 5% did not participate, but did want to participate, and another 48% did. And this is close to the OECD average. So, maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe people have done their estimations of whether or not they need learning for their jobs, and may have decided, no, I don't need it for my current job. I'm quite happy. But given the pressures that I talked about earlier, and how various megatrends are changing our economies and society, that is something we may want to look at more. And indeed, in a lot of the countries we've worked at, they are very focused on this issue, and they want to be more proactive. And they're asking questions about, how do I develop a culture of lifelong learning? The barriers to adult learning, of course, are numerous, and none of these will be surprising to any of you. Cost is an issue, and it seems to be a greater issue in Slovenia than it is in other countries that participate in adult surveyed skills. Being too busy at work is an issue. Course programs not being offered in convenient times or places, or child care family responses are also issues. And so what this means is that there's no one policy tool that we can introduce that's going to magically make all of these people in adulthood want to learn and to be able to learn. It will require a multi-pronged approach. Adults with the lowest skills are less likely to participate. And that's, of course, a concern, but it's also probably not surprising for for the reasons mentioned in the previous presentations. People with low skills, sorry, I just should explain that figure. This is showing the people with the highest skill levels in surveyed adult skills and those with the lowest. And you see in Slovenia, about 80% of the people with the highest skills are participating, and only about 25% of the lowest skills are participating. As I was saying, it's probably not surprising, because people who do not develop strong skills early in life are likely not going to participate in learning later in life. If you had a bad experience in early learning, you may see that learning in education as a scene of the crime, so to speak. And so, how do you get people to go back to the scene of the crime? They don't want to go back there. I had a bad experience there. That was a humiliating experience. So how do you find ways to encourage adults, low-skilled adults in particular, to re-engage with learning? And that's an important issue, and a tricky one that countries around the world are trying to tackle. Attachment to labor market matters for training, access to training. We received that participation in open and distance education is greater for those who are in education employed versus those who are in education unemployed or out of the labor force. Part of this, of course, relates to the fact that digitalization creates new opportunities for people to learn in workplaces. So how do we harness digital technology to overcome some of the barriers that we just mentioned to people participating in learning in adulthood? Slovenia, we see that relatively small shares of people are participating in open distance education, and so that's something that Slovenia would want to look at. So key areas for action in improving skills development that we've identified, and that will be highlighted in our updated OECD skills strategy: developing a culture of lifelong learning by raising aspirations and supporting informed learning choices, which I've talked a lot about already; preparing lifelong learners by building a strong foundation in the early years, which I've also talked about quite a bit; making learning sustainable and rewarding in adulthood by strengthening financing arrangements for lifelong learning. Again, if you go back to that figure that I showed you earlier, which showed that cost was considered to be a major issue in Slovenia, this is important in that context. Making lifelong learning visible by strengthening systems for skills validation and certification. If we're going to be encouraging people to be learning more in adulthood, and that a lot of that's happening informally, they're only going to do it if they're rewarded for doing so, and they're only going to be rewarded for doing so if those can be recognized. So more work to be done on that in many countries. And making lifelong learning accessible and relevant by encouraging the development of education training markets that are more responsive to the needs of adults. Again, if you go back to the figures showing the barriers, we have issues such as courses not being offered at appropriate times for adults. How do we find ways to offer courses at appropriate times for adults? Through digital technology, perhaps. Childcare responsibilities. Again, through digital technology, perhaps we can find ways that people can engage with learning that does not get in the way of their childcare. Also, having more modular and stacked programs and stackable credits can help people to engage in learning in adulthood and throughout their lives. So some examples of good practices we've come across. The Norway Committee on Skills Needs coordinates the work of ministries and stakeholders in the area of skills needs assessment and responses. Germany My Skills project is a test that helps job seekers without formal qualifications, vocational qualifications, to demonstrate that they do indeed have those qualifications. Denmark's adult education and continuing education system is a completely parallel education system. It's not an adjunct. And Japan's whole child education develops a broad range of skills by applying various approaches and activating teachers. So let's look at our second component of the strategy, using skills effectively in working life. Here we see something that's probably quite intuitive to all of you. Education and skills proficiency are key to activating skills, key to helping people to find jobs where they can use their skills. We simply see here that people with higher levels of skills and higher levels of education are more likely to be employed. And here we see that education and skills proficiency are also key to using skills. You see countries that do a good job of developing the skills of adults are also countries in which skills are used more intensively than in other countries. The intensity of skills used, moreover, varies quite considerably across countries, as you see here. And Slovenia is just slightly below average in reading, and you could see a similar figure for other sorts of skills that we assess. The blue bar shows as an indicator of reading at work, and the white diamond is literacy proficiency, just as a comparison purposes. And what this shows is that some of the countries on the right are doing a relatively better job of developing skills than they are using the skills, and so there's a potential loss of investment in skills in the first place. And on the left-hand side, you have countries that perhaps are doing a better job of using the skills with the skills that they've developed, and I'll point to the United States as a particular example of that. So to some degree, there are countries that are finding a better way to milk more out of the skills that they've invested in. So how do you do that? Well, high-performance workplace practices are found to drive skills use. There's a strong correlation you see here between the adoption rate of high-performance workplace practices and skills use. And what is a high-performance workplace practice? They include organizational practices such as teamwork, autonomy, task discretion, mentoring, and job rotation, as well as management practices such as use of incentive pay, training practices, and flexibility in working hours. This is another figure showing the importance of high-performance workplace practices, showing the contribution of various factors to the variance in skills use of work, and you see indeed high-performance workplace practices explain more of the variation in the intensity of skills use than do such things as firm size, occupation, skills proficiency, industry, or other effects. So again, this is an important mechanism for helping countries to make better use of the skills that they develop so that individuals can benefit from higher wages and countries can benefit from higher productivity. SMEs in particular could benefit from increased adoption from high-performance workplace practices. You see that microenterprises with between 1 and 10 employees are, and large enterprises with more than 250 employees are more likely to adopt these practices than small enterprises with between 11 and 50 employees and medium-sized enterprises between 51 and 250 employees. Given that Slovenia has a very large share of small enterprises, of course, this is something that we would want to look at in the context of the country. But skills use does not matter only for economic reasons. It also matters for social success. The effect of skills is positive on social outcomes, even controlling for skills proficiency. So people who use the skills more intensively experience higher levels of trust, greater levels of participation in volunteerism, greater political efficacy, and better health as well. So I'm going to turn now, here are some of the key areas for action to improve skills: promoting labor market participation by reducing barriers to work and activating displaced workers, so finding ways for people to get jobs and stay in the labor market; making more intensive use of skills in the economy by improving work organization and management practice, so the high-performance workplace practices I've mentioned; using skills strategically to foster innovation and growth. So when you invest in R&D, for example, making sure that people have the skills to be successful and make use of that investment. And using skills to strengthen social cohesion by promoting and facilitating and incentivizing skills use in society. and expanding the pool of available talent by attracting the right skills from abroad and improving transparency of skills and providing language training so migrants can use their skills fully in society. Some good practices we've identified: UK's investment fund, whereby employers submit funding proposals to tackle particular skills challenges while working in partnership with their employees, trade unions, and training providers. Italy's Industry 4.0, which is a set of industrial policies that support using skills to transition to a more high technology environment. New Zealand has a number of policies to promote awareness about high performance workplace practices and their benefits for employees and employers. And the Finnish Workforce Development Project, which also does a similar thing, promoting awareness and distribution of high-performance workplace practices. So I'm turning now to the final component of our strategy, strengthening governance of skill systems. So why is this important? Well, in the countries that we work with, we see an issue we call the policy headache, which is isolated sectoral policies do not always have their intended consequences. If countries, for example, focus on improving education outcomes, but at the same time are not doing anything to stimulate demand for skills in the labor market, what you may find is that individuals graduate and they're not able to find jobs, and they're not able to find jobs that require the skills they need. So they move to other countries where they can find those jobs and get higher wages. So if you're not doing both of those things, it may be counteractive. If countries improve access to tertiary education without improving also primary and secondary education, they may find that they don't have that much better skills outcomes. You spend a lot of money improving access, but if you're not making sure that the people coming into the system have strong skills, there's only so much tertiary education system can do. And increasing R&D investment in the sector, if there's lack of tailored educational services to support that, you may find that firms cannot implement additional transitions. So a range of policies is needed to make the most out of the digital transformation. We need education policies to develop the right skills to better harness the potential of technology. We need labor market policies to ensure flexible and adaptable labor markets. We need industrial policies to foster competitiveness and adopt digital innovations. We need housing and transportation policies to ensure mobility of workers. We need innovation policies to adopt and invent new technologies. Migration policies to influence the supply of skills and support knowledge spillovers. Tax policies to create incentives for employers and employees to invest in skills. And social policies to ensure social protection for people in non-standard work and the unemployed. So all these things need to work together. It's the reason why, for example, in Slovenia we had in our project, I believe it was 9 ministries working together, because there's no one ministry with responsibility for skills outcomes in countries. It takes the efforts of all of these ministries working together to affect change. So coordinating, aligning, and sequencing reforms is important for optimizing the output of skills policies. So looking back at the figure I showed you about the policy headache, if you better coordinate and align those policies so that you're working on multiple areas at the same time, you're going to find you're going to achieve better outcomes. Policies that are coherent and policies that are mutually reinforcing. Countries, as I mentioned earlier, governments are increasingly interested in influencing activities in contexts in which they've traditionally been less involved and have fewer tools, such as developing a culture of lifelong learning and making more intensive work of people in workplaces. And in order to affect change, they're finding they need not only to work better across ministries and across different levels of government, but they also need to work with the stakeholders, because that's where the people are, right? Especially in the adult years. You need to work with employers, trade unions, educational institutions, employment services, SMEs, representatives, student organizations, and professional associations. So the need for collaboration increases. It increases particularly in the context of adult learning. It's not like, in primary, secondary years where you can lock these kids into classrooms and you can force down a particular curriculum down their throats. So you can't do that in adulthood. It's much more heterogeneous. So collaboration is essential. So key areas for action for improving governance, strengthening collaboration across governments to ensure that policies are aligned and coherent and mutually reinforcing, so across ministries, across levels of government, engaging with stakeholders to ensure that they have input on policy design and implementation, and also at the same time building support among stakeholders to take joint action in areas which will require their action to be successful. Building integrated information systems to ensure that all individuals have the information they need to make informed choices, and aligning and coordinating financing to ensure that the financing goes to those most in need, is used effectively and efficiently. So some examples of good practices that we've seen across countries: Portugal's General Council for Professional Training advises government on ongoing improvement of its public service, including developing skills for engagement, so that the public service can do a better job of engaging with stakeholders. The Illinois Longitudinal Data System links education and labor market data to support research and analysis by government and qualified third parties, while establishing strong protocols to preserve security. We've seen many pieces of news segments recently about data going missing. You know, we need to have data in order to create strong policies, but at the same time we need to find ways in which to preserve that data, the privacy of individuals. The U.S. Next Generation Sector Partnerships supports public partners from local workforce development, economic development, education, to work with stakeholders to respond to the challenges identified by those stakeholders. So it's not paternalistic, it's not government saying, here's what you need to do, and here's some money, and do it with us. It's government saying, well, let's listen to you. What do you think the challenges are? How can we work with you to help resolve your challenges? In Ireland, SkillsNet supports groups of private businesses in the same sector region to come together to fund training that they may not have been able to fund on their own. Okay, so you know, through collaboration, we can all do better. So these are just some examples of some of the findings that you'll see in the Cco Strategy update, which I hope that you will take a look at when it's launched in the spring. In that, we will talk about lessons learned, some of the ones that we've heard today, about working with 11 countries on Cco Strategy projects. We will highlight new evidence on digitalization and other megatrends, and what they mean for demand for higher new bundles of skills, how they're resulting in greater demand for learning throughout life, and how it's creating a greater need for strong governance. And we'll provide analytical insights about policies that work, not just from the work that we've done here with National Cco Strategy projects, but across the OECD, with all of the various directives that are doing work in skills-related areas. So, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you're not starving, and I hope that you found it informative and entertaining, and thank you very much for your time.